Right, Dr. Wilson, you spoke on gender inequality and how this issue can never be tackled. So if you could tell us more about it.
I'm not saying that the issue cannot be tackled. I'm actually saying that gender inequality has to be tackled because we have reached a juncture in our society and in history where it is extremely important that women's voices be heard. And it's partly because, or wholly because, women have different bodies, different minds, different hearts, and our points of view need to be represented because that way we can create a more holistic and maybe a healthier world for everybody. So for an example is we tend to feel like only women struggle with work-life balance because they have so many responsibilities. But in a more gender neutral world, men would also find that to be an issue, and once they found it to be an issue, their lives would be healthier and happier because they would have better work-life balance.
If you could tell us about your organization and how are you involved in women empowerment in India?
Center for Creative Leadership has an excellent reputation for leadership development. We have for the last 15 years been mentioned by Financial Times and Bloomberg Business Week for our leadership development as being among the top 10 and in the last 2 years the top 5. So to be able to take the technology of personal development and to bring it into the arena of how women can be assisted to become stronger in their voices, learn more about how to involve and work with other people, and begin to be more ambitious in terms of making a contribution to their society, to their organizations, and not just their families. That's the paths that we are now treading, and the acronym we have given it is AWIN, Asia Women's Initiatives and Network, and this is an initiative that we have started in the last year. But this doesn't mean that this is the only time we've done women's work. We have been working with women's groups at the grassroots level. What is really inspiring is that the basic principles of how people develop are needed all the way at the top by senior corporates, but those very same principles of how people grow and develop can be taught to anybody in any setting, whether it is a rural person, whether it is a student, whether it is a artist. Everybody can benefit from the basic principles of leadership development, which are really about self-knowledge, getting along with other people, and working together with others to produce an impact and make changes in a direction that we all want.
How do you think we Indians can produce more leaders, and leaders in the literal meaning of it, in the boardrooms and also in the other sectors?
I think you've asked an excellent question. One of the factors that I feel holds Indians back is we have too much respect for status and authority. So in other words, even in India, when you talk to leaders who are getting results, how they are achieving those results is often because they have learned to minimize status differences and encourage young people, women, and people at all levels and across all functions to interact in a more egalitarian way. Because once upon a time, status may have made a big difference. Once upon a time, if you said to somebody, look, just do as I'm telling you and don't think about it, that may have worked. But in the kind of world we have today, with as much complexity, as much churn, that stance is simply not going to work. And so in India, coming back to the question of India, the sooner and faster people can learn that there needs to be a more egalitarian relationship and that everybody has the capacity to give other people direction, to bring them together, to create new ways, that the country has so many people, it would explode with leadership. we would begin to find many more solutions that we find on the table right now.
Right. What's the future of women entrepreneurs in the next decade, or let's say two?
Sky high. They can write their own ticket. I think that it is an emerging field where women have realized that they want more control for themselves, and also that they want to make stronger contributions, and the mindsets that they bring to the contribution they make is going to be phenomenal, because we come to it with a different mind and a heart. So from examples that I heard from, for example, a TEDx event that I attended in Mumbai, the kinds of issues that concern them have to do with what happens with blind people and how can we create products and services so that they too can experience what it means to lead a dignified life. So the concerns are just different, and I feel that the more women entrepreneurs we have, we just open up that lid and we let them out and let them run with being entrepreneurs, and the sky's the limit.
Right. According to you, what do you think is in store from the Digital India and Make in India campaign for women in general and women entrepreneurs as well?
It's all for the good. I think that sometimes I mistrust campaigns because it feels like it's more about show. But on the other hand, if both those campaigns give women a leg up to keep going, it's good. We, as I mentioned earlier, we have gotten to the point where anything that we can do to bring women to the table, to incorporate their views, to see how they behave, it's all to the good. I'd like to actually mention a comment that I have heard, that when women are around, men tend to behave better. And I think that's absolutely true. And so that's why we need more women around. The men also feel like we have to behave better.
Right. If you could talk about the corporate social responsibility of your organization, if any, or if there is any involvement with the women empowerment apart from CSR activity.
So if I get your question right, we are a not-for-profit, and so we are directed to promoting leadership not just in corporates but also at the grassroots level. We have a program, Leadership Beyond Boundaries, and the idea is how can we take the fundamentals of leadership and communicate it down to the grassroots level. Here's what we have found. When you start sharing those ideas about what does it mean to know yourself, to understand your personality, to understand whether you're introvert or extrovert, to understand how you respond to change, do you hold back or do you jump in, we find that people want it earlier and earlier. So I would say that as a not-for-profit, all our activities are directed toward education, and all of that education is based in research. So in that sense, we are the ones who kind of sound the bell for saying, how can all organizations become more socially responsible? I think that inclusiveness is woven into the fabric of the organization. So in terms of, right from the very beginning, the idea was like, look, let's focus on making sure that women, or because it was in the US, Hispanics, people from the Afro-American community, all of these communities can actually benefit from the kinds of programs, and so that has always been a part of the diversity and inclusion, has always been a part from the organization from day one.
All right. What's your thoughts on the two Indias we have and the two set of women we have? The women who is empowered because of education and a high standard of living, and we have the absolute marginalized women.
I think you've just asked a very interesting question, because in some ways my observations and reading leads me to believe that the so-called marginalized women are actually more able to take risks because they have nothing to lose. And so, for example, when we see women excel in the sports world, when we see women excel sometimes even as entrepreneurs in the rural areas where they have the self-help groups, It's because they accept the responsibility for their children, for making sure that their own families have a better life in the future. So I see women who are so-called marginalized being willing to empower themselves to go for it. I think the extremely privileged women also do establish themselves at the heads of organizations, but sometimes just below that very privileged sector of women in society, there is another sector that is just as privileged but is far more risk averse, and it is because they are more concerned about the appearances of how their behavior will impact their families. There is a lot of pressure on privileged women to actually form with the norm, perform and norm. And sometimes the marginalized women don't really have any norms that support them because there's nowhere to go but up, and so they take the risk.
Right. If you are to name 3 major challenges the Indian ecosystem is facing.
I think the patriarchal attitudes, sorry to be so truistic about it, but just the gender expectation that this is the role that women are supposed to play and this is the role that men are supposed to play. Somehow we box ourselves in and we don't utilize the potential, because the minute you allow women to come out of that box where you say you're a baby maker, you're a cook, but the minute we say, hey, you can be an engineer, you can actually fix gas turbines in power plants, then we actually release a whole other 50% of talent, and it can only be helpful to the country. So that's one. And I would say the second one, from my point of view, for Indian women is it is time for us to recognize that we have been put upon. I myself actually didn't realize that there are chauvinistic attitudes that limit me, and that there are perceptions out there of what I can and cannot do, and therefore I am not given opportunities. So I think it's time also for women to wake up to the patriarchal attitudes and start to talk to each other about how we can get around some of those. So I would just keep it to 2, just to understand what is the nature of patriarchal attitudes and where they come from, and then to coalesce and come together as a community with men and with women to understand how to combat that, because that's going to keep our society down. There's no question in my mind about that.